courage is really about the commitment to begin, no matter how messy you show up, without the guarantee of success.
And I think so often we're our worst critic and we're so hard on ourselves. And what if like you just started talking so much kinder to yourself? And that's what that was.
We often say we got to find the right community. You may have had the right community for the moment. And now as you grow and move into a different place, there may be a different community that's the right community.
Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the little voice at the end of the day that says, I'll try again tomorrow. Hey Nation, welcome back to the Living Richly podcast. Today we're talking about something that could be the game changer between playing it safe or taking a big leap of faith. So whether you're here looking for some help to make a bold move, or maybe just that nudge you need to get out of your comfort zone, then this episode's got you. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. Guys, let's talk about courage today, because I think it is one of the most important virtues for living richly. And let me start by just saying, like, fear is a thing.
Yeah, big thing.
What?
Right, when you think about it, when I was reflecting on this episode, I'm thinking how often fear shows up in my life or in the conversations that I have, the conversations we have with friends, with clients. Fear is like a serious blocker to potential and living a great life.
So true.
So I'm curious, as we start off, like, was there ever a moment where fear nearly stopped you, but you went ahead anyway?
Yeah, like all the time. But like when reading the question, I'm like, yeah, it shows up all the time.
Yeah.
I think like most recently and the biggest one was get to mindset.
Yeah.
Like to take a leap of faith to start my own business as I'm also joining another business was like literally the fear alarm bells are screaming, what are you doing? Like it's, so for me, that was a huge leap of faith because that was a passion for me. And that's something I really wanted to do. And all I could think about was, what is everyone going to think? And like the scripts running through my head were just so strong. So glad I did it. And I think I pushed through because it was so connected to me and my purpose and my values.
Oh, I love how you connected it to purpose and values.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
I think for me, leaving my job in the HR space, just, it was, I want to say, my comfort zone because I was so just ingrained in it. And, I had opportunities to stay in that space after the layoff, but that was where I choose to, take the severance package and move into fitness and coaching full time. And same thing, right? It was at a time where, I had just bought a new home and there's so many reasons telling me, no, like, what are you doing? But I went ahead and continued to do it anyways.
Yeah. That's so good.
It really is. It's that fear of the unknown, right?
Yeah.
And
Well said.
the false expectations appearing real.
Yeah.
And I think, similar to you.
Say that again. Fear. We've used that before. Fear as an acronym.
Right. False expectations appearing real.
Right. We're treating something that has not yet happened as though it has. Yeah. And as a result, we often play the safe game.
Absolutely. And what's amazing is as you lean into living richly and what does it mean to live your best life, the shift happens where we can create any story we want about the future.
Right.
So we can create a negative one or we can create a positive one.
Totally.
Neither has happened. And so it's just in how you approach it. But certainly, kind of what you said, Kate, about it happens all the time. This is reality. Even as I've kind of progressed and moved along the journey of living richly, there are still days, maybe weekly, certainly monthly. There are times when I'm having to come up against fear again and make a decision on how I'm going to approach. For me, probably a big one was similar to you, leaving the church world, where I wrestled with that for 4 or 5 years, where I knew I was done, but I kept going at it because I had the idea of staying in what I knew was more comfortable than venturing out into something that was the unknown.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I think it's Susan Adler that said, courage is not the absence of fear, it's fear walking.
Yeah.
And it's been one of my favorite sort of quotes or meditations on the power of bravery. And for me, courage is one of my 4 core values, personal core values. So this one is really close to home for me. I can certainly relate to leaving the church.
Of course.
There's been so many moments. It was really hard to choose here because there's been so many many moments where I was standing on the precipice of either playing it safe or making a bold move. But the two that came to mind was launching my first coaching business. I did that in the midst of my first marriage falling apart, and my life was a complete disaster. And everyone was telling me, Deshaun, just go get a job. Like, you've got kids to support and everything else. And I knew I had to do this, right? And more recently, since last year, re-envisioning our existing business and taking that to a whole other level, and facing off with fear and insecurity probably every single day, and yet knowing it's the right thing to do. I think when we stare fear in the face and find the courage to move forward, and sometimes I think that's going to be in big, bold moves, and other times it's like micro moments of courage where we're just taking an inch of a step forward. Every time we do that, we train ourselves to do hard things, and we build the case for the fact I can do whatever I set my mind to. I think that courage breeds faith and conviction, and that is worth absolute gold in living our best lives, right? Let's talk about how you guys define courage. I mean, again, words really matter, and we all tend to have our understanding of what something means, but how would you define courage? And is it something you're born with? Can it be developed? Let's just explore that for a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, courage is about showing, for me anyways, is about showing up authentically, like showing up and moving through it. And that for me is as simple as it gets. Like, fear is always going to be there. It's how you move through the fear. That to me is really the courage part. And I don't think we're born with it. Do I think some people are more courageous than others? Yes. I think it's learned. I think the more you practice showing up courageously, the easier it gets. And I think it's a trained skill that we learn over time. It's the same thing as like tying your shoe. Do kids tie shoelaces anymore? I don't even know.
It's like pulling the Velcro straps together.
Is that what it is? I feel like now they just like slip in and
I know they have it. So yeah. Remember how tough it was when we were kids learning to tie your shoes? They got it easy now.
Oh my God, the bunny ears. Yeah. Anyway, I do think we learn it over time. I think it's the same as tying your shoes.
Yeah, it's like a muscle, right? Like you have to continue to practice to train it. And I think that the more we practice it, it can start to define the quality of our minds, because courage is really about the commitment to begin, no matter how messy you show up, without the guarantee of success.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
Love that. I've only done this twice on the show. This will be the second time. I want to read a short excerpt. This is
14 pages.
It's only about a 7-page document, so settle in. It's going to be about 20 minutes.
Get your popcorn.
This will be quick. But when I defined my core values, then the second stage we encourage everyone to do is, well, what does that mean to you? And this is what it means to me. For me, courage is about facing life head on, not running from the tough stuff or burying my head in the sand. Courage is about facing and embracing my fear, my anxiety, and my uncertainty, and taking action anyway. It means holding fast in the storm and staying steady no matter what life throws my way. Courage is staying in the game even when it seems like I'm losing or I just don't feel like playing anymore. Most of all, courage is about leaning on the people closest to me, drawing strength from my community. In many ways, it's about borrowing some of their courage to see me through, inviting them to encourage me, to put their courage into me. It's always my choice to make, and no one can make it for me, and yet I know I'm not in this alone. My courage will always be greatly enhanced and amplified when expressed in vibrant communion with my tribe. If there's anything my successes and scars have taught me over the years, is that there's always more strength and resilience to tap into if I'll just dig deep enough. One author put it this way: courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the little voice at the end of the day that says, I'll try again tomorrow.
Yeah, I love that.
That's great.
That's great.
Yeah, so powerful. And I'm going to encourage, and we'll try to remember to make a note of this, is I'd like to put in the show notes that exact excerpt.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll just make sure. Hey, Steve, you're here, right?
Yay!
All right, maybe we'll ask Steve to just make a note to remind us of that so that we don't forget afterwards. Yeah. I think that would be, I think it would be great to have that.
So what's
right
great? We're all on fire. We feel like we're on fire today.
Yeah.
So is our producer.
Yeah,
Steve's on fire.
He's always on. Yeah, a little too much energy.
No, I love it.
It's great. So I love all of that. That's it's so powerful, and you've shared that with me before. I think it's such an incredible way of defining courage. I lean into what you said earlier about courage is really about showing up authentically. When I ask, where I might kind of disagree or push back on is it something we're born with or is it something we develop? The answer is yes. I think it is a bit of both. And the only reason I say that is if the definition is about showing up authentically, you look at any 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, and they do exactly that. They have no clue that what they're doing looks silly to, they haven't yet embraced shame.
Yeah, I love that.
And so in that context, they are absolutely showing up as themselves. Then we learn to embrace shame, and shame brings fear, which then holds us back from being courageous. And then we need to develop it. So a lot of what we're talking about when it comes to courage is going back to that inner child who is willing to just live life fearlessly and get back to that.
Yeah, I remember when your first toddler started walking. And it was so exciting. And then a weekend, you're going, I wish they'd go back to crawling, right? Because they're fearless. Like they have no limitations or barriers, and it can be pretty crazy.
It's so funny with my oldest. He walked at 9 months, and I wanted him to walk so badly. And then my second, I was like, no, we're not. And he was 15 months until he walked. I was like, just take your time because of that fear. Yes.
Let's talk about a maybe situation or time in your life or an evolution where your understanding of courage changed or morphed or evolved.
Yeah, for me, 30 years of believing that courage or the idea that we needed to sacrifice self, and that courage was the more you were willing to give up of yourself, the more you were willing to be less, that was courageous. That, look at them willing to sacrifice anything. And, from the church world, we talk about missionaries who would go into these, tribes and these places in the world, and they would sacrifice all of the comforts of home and all of this in order to go and reach an unreached people kind of thing. And that was courageous. Where that has shifted dramatically to me now is courageous behavior is embracing self. And again, as we've talked about, showing up authentically first and then being able to connect to other people. It starts internal in how we love and own who we are is the most courageous act we can have.
And I have to agree with that because yes, when we think about courage or being courageous, a lot of times people think it's the big, bold moves and, or taking like huge risks. And for me, it was kind of a different shift where it was more about learning to ask for help and being okay with being vulnerable and realizing that I didn't have to soldier alone or, walk the journey alone, and it was okay. So therapy is a great example, right? Learning to be vulnerable and, embracing that it's okay to allow people in, and it's okay to ask for support because that eventually helps you build up your courageous immunity to continue down that path of life.
100%. It's the same for me. It's that like courage isn't always about putting your armor on. It's not like you're going into war all the time. It's sometimes about taking all the armor off and actually showing up in a vulnerable way. That is equally courageous. I think sometimes we think as courage is this big, bold thing. And sometimes it can just be that really subtle, vulnerable moment. It's equally courageous.
Yeah, we're going to be exploring actually different types of courage on today's show. And I love that you've introduced that. I think for me, definitely it was, I think like you guys, more of an evolution than a moment. I used to be, like I think many of you, the idea of courage were these epic acts of bravery, right? Like, and again, a story that always stood out for me as a young kid, right into as long as I was in the church world, still a story that I love today is the story of David and Goliath, right? This little 14-year-old kid, shepherd boy with a sling who takes out this like 10-foot tall, seasoned warrior from the other side called Goliath and takes him out with one stone. I mean, what a story. But you kind of set yourself up for pretty high standard if that's your definition of bravery,
it's hard
right?
To find 10 feet giants.
Well, the 10-foot giants are hard to find, right? We'd have to go to the world of WWF, I think, right? Or WWE now, whatever it's called. But it's more understanding that I'm more about those micro moments of courage now. And I do think those then prepare you for the bigger moments where you're going to have to like launch a business or leave a career or leave a religious construct that you've been in your whole life. Like those are moments that you build up to. But I don't know if you have the courage to face those if you haven't been doing the little stuff day to day. Even David killed a lion and a bear before he ever faced off with Goliath. And that's what gave him the courage. again, I still read the story. I go, killing a lion and a bear is still a big deal, right? I wouldn't exactly put that in a just a little thing he did.
Maybe there was a lamb before that.
Maybe,
they don't mention it.
Maybe he was a serial killer. I wonder if he was burying those animals in his dad's backyard.
Maybe kittens.
So much. It got dark.
It got dark. He started off with squirrels. Then he moved on to cats, and then he was burying bears and lions in his dad's backyard,
and then humans,
and then
you're watching too much.
Oh my God! I got to get off Netflix. I tell you, it's really messing with me.
We just do not send hate mail.
I love David. Still love David.
He's a serial killer and all.
He's a great mythical figure, Bible figure, whatever you want to call him. Okay, let's shift gears before the entire religious community shuts us down, and start exploring different types of courage. Let's start with the most obvious one, which is often what we, I think most people see as courage, which is physical courage. This is about facing fear head on. Think of, I just rewatched a great documentary on 9/11 and all the first responders. You know, everyone was trying to run, we're trying to get out of the buildings. They're running in, right? And firefighters, that's their thing. Think of the firefighters right now in LA, right? Running into the fire as opposed to away from it. But tell me about a time perhaps where physical courage showed up for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to use the example of bungee jumping. And because for me, that was it was a really difficult moment. I've jumped out of a plane and I had not nearly the same amount of fear than bungee jumping.
Wow.
And I bungee jumped first. So jumping out of a plane, if you've never done it the first time, you're anchored to someone else, right? Like you're attached to someone else.
Yeah,
so you get in the plane. Yeah, thank you. That's the word I couldn't quite find. Together.
Together. You're taped together. You're bungee corded
doing
together.
this.
Anyway, you're together. You're hooked together. Yeah.
But they're the ones in control. Like they kind of push you. They walk you over. They're not like pushing you out of the plane, but they're ready and you're gone. Like you can't really do anything. Plus when you jump out of a plane, it was cloudy. I can't see the ground. But when I was bungee jumping, I did the one in Wakefield, not far from Ottawa. Like it's over a quarry. Like you literally have to step off of this ledge and every sense in your body is like, you're going to die. Don't do it.
Do not do this.
Right. So it was a battle for me to figure out, can I actually, and you might say that's a bit of a mental piece too, but physically my body, it's like there was like a wall in front of me and I couldn't step off because it was just me and I had to take that leap. And I can feel the tingles in my feet and I screamed the whole way down.
But I wonder now, if not that you might want to do it again, but doing it a second time. Now you wouldn't want to do it again. But I remember years ago, I was part of this leadership exercise and part of it one day was rappelling down a 90-foot cliff. Now I'd never rappelled before. So they're teaching all of us, like getting us into our harnesses and as they're getting us ready to do this, they're explaining to us how powerful the gear is, how important the gear is, that literally you could suspend a minivan off the same rig that I'm going to be relying on to go down the mountain. So of course they're doing this to build confidence, but I remember backing up to the edge of a cliff.
It's the worst.
So imagine you're backing up to the edge of a cliff. Your body's going, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
Like your fear.
Your amygdala. Like everything's firing.
What are you doing? And I remember I went to step, you're supposed to then just fall into that position where you kind of sit into the right off the edge, and I didn't. I fell on my ass and then had to push myself with my feet and went down. And once I got my stride, I was like, okay, well, by the end of the day, I was having so much fun now. So what was fearful at the beginning, once I learned to trust the gear, at the end of the day, they said, Eric, we've been watching you. You're doing pretty good. Do you want to try it Aussie style? And I said, what is that? He says, well, we put the harness on you backwards, and instead of rappelling down with your butt towards the ground, like you're backed, you literally run down the face of the mountain facing the ground. So you're literally running just like that down the face of the cliff. I have never had so much fun in my life. But it's what starts as something fearful, when you learn to trust the gear, all of a sudden I think you can do things that are a lot more.
So I will say that the second I was done, all I wanted to do was do it again.
Yeah.
Now, it was before kids. So where it's 20 years later, I'm old now. I don't want to do it again. But I will say the moment right after, once you push through the fear for me, was high adrenaline. I'm in, let's go.
Let's do this again.
That. Yeah,
love it.
for sure. Yeah.
How about for you?
I've never bungee jumped. Never jumped out of a plane. And I don't know if I could. Like, that's where, even just hearing you talk about it, right? The physical, when we're talking about physical fear.
Yeah.
Already I feel like, oh, my stomach's like, like, I don't, right? So it's amazing how the body responds to even just hearing people talk about it.
100. Yeah. Like I tingle, but it's a memory for me for sure.
Yeah.
You're just tingling.
She's the tingles.
The tingles. She got the
tingles.
tingles. Yeah.
I think that the physical for me, I relate it to my accident 7 years ago, and just being able to tie the physical fear of, even though I don't remember anything that happened, the physical fear of all of the scripts in my head, or how am I going to come out of this on the other side? You know, and part of that is, you know, the self-talk in our heads and I think that played a huge role in why I recovered as quickly as I did.
Yeah.
It's amazing how often, because you reference this as well, when we talk physical courage, how much of physical courage is still mental.
Oh, 100%,
yeah. Right?
100%.
And how
Big
they tie
time.
them together for
Yeah.
sure. Like, it really is
the
around.
mind-body connection is inseparable. It's huge.
And you talk earlier about firefighters and first responders and how they run to when we run away from. That's mental for them. It's trained behavior that they have done over and over and over again, so that it just happens without thought.
Yeah.
It triggers and they go.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of our physical courage has to start with training the brain.
Yeah, 100%. I still remember I was in my early 20s when I launched my first church. This is back another lifetime ago. Didn't even have a fully formed frontal lobe. I had no training for this, but we were an inner city church in a bad part of town. I remember facing off with things like death threats from drug dealers. And I remember death threats from one particular pimp because we were helping a girl get off the street, get off drugs, and he was threatening my life. We used to have I had to have bouncers at the church that watched out for me because people literally tried on more than one occasion physically attack me in the building, young 20-something, right? Helping people with severe addiction issues, severe mental health issues who could go off the handle at any moment in time. So facing off with that, it's funny. I walk downtown now with folks sometimes, and they'll see someone who's homeless or whatever. Most people cross the street, go the other way, and I walk by and I say hello and engage with them. Again, it's exposure, it's conditioning, right?
Yeah.
When I always say, to just look in the eyes, you'll know whether you should go the other side of the street or whether you can engage, right? But that's training, right?
And that's interesting because my conditioning as a woman is don't go near, don't make eye contact, and cross the street.
Yeah.
And that's my conditioning.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
And I think it ties in, right? You and I with the same backgrounds, me with bikers, and the idea of some of the stuff and the experiences I've had. I remember the first time walking into an outlaw clubhouse.
Yep.
Whereas, it got to the point.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Hey, what are you doing over there? Hey, you guys look like you're in a really, right? But I mean, it is for most people, it is a scary thing. Or going to a bike event where you've got, again, a whole bunch of club members standing around and literally walking in where you've got their prospects and the hang-arounds. They see you as an outsider. They get right in your face, and you have to show strength back. So there were so many experiences like that. And to your point, it's a conditioning that as you get more comfortable with it, I don't even bat an eye when it comes to that today.
Yeah. Love that. And I think, again, before we shift to the next one, we talk often, even when we talk about the four elements of earth being body, fire being heart, water being mind, and wind being spirit, that for a lot of folks, their journey begins often with the earth element, where they push themselves. Take like someone who starts to get into shape, starts to push themselves. It's amazing when you push yourself physically beyond the fear and the false limitations that you've accepted about what your body can do, that all of a sudden your mind goes, oh, I wonder what else I can do.
Yeah.
Right? So again, it's that micro evolution. Let's talk about moral courage. This is about standing up for what's right, even when it's not popular. This is like staying true to your values, if doing that might even means that you stand alone. How does that show up for you?
For me, I know it was interesting when I saw that question. I went right back to the very first place that I was just a young pastor, literally right out of Bible college. We've just had the opportunity in the last last few weeks, we were in that area for a hockey tournament.
Wow.
And so we drove by and I showed her the first church that I ever worked in.
Did you have like a
little bit of
down in front of
I had 16.
He burst into flames.
He burst into flames.
In the parking lot, I felt heat and. But
it's like a vampire, right? It's like totally. A vampire hitting the sunlight.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah. But I remember coming out of Bible college, out of seminary, and I was ready to change the world. I was excited. I had all the cause and purpose. And then I go into this first place, part-time position, and this church is in complete division, like literally where people who support the pastor at front of the church, a bunch of empty spaces, and then the people who want the pastor gone, like complete division. And I had a board member, my very first board meeting, a board member turned and pointed a finger right at me and said, "You better get behind us or we're coming after you next."
Wow.
And I remember talking to my district. I was like, what do I do? What do I do? And he made this statement. He said, unless there's a moral issue with the pastor, you will never go wrong if you show loyalty and stand with the people that you are working with.
Wow.
And I remember doing that, recognizing I may lose my job, but it may be my whole ministry, my whole career might be over before it started. But I remember making that stand and saying, no matter what you say to me, I am going to stand with the pastor because what you're doing is wrong. And that has kept to me the loyalty piece to stand with the people that I believe are right. That was a phenomenal lesson, although it was horrible at the time to go through that.
And I couldn't help, as you were talking about that, thinking of like, love God, love your neighbor. Wow, that was like, we're coming after you next.
It was literally, that was the phrase.
Wow, death threats in church.
Yeah.
No,
go ahead. You want to go?
You can arm wrestle.
Should we arm wrestle?
Yeah, arm wrestle right here on the show. We've never done this. First time live on the Living Richly podcast.
All right, Steve, zoom in
this corner.
I'm gonna let Tingley go.
New nicknames. over to Tingley.
I was going to say, I don't have specific example, although I'm sure I could think of one. But, I think in the course of my HR career, there were so many times from an HR capacity, because my role was around employee relations and being that middle person between supporting the business and supporting the employee. So many times where I really had to stand firm in whether it's, letting somebody go, or on the opposite side, supporting the employee and helping the business understand why, despite not being a popular person sometimes in that role. And then as a parent, I think, there's so many times as parents where we make decisions and our kids don't like us. And you see it more and more these days where parenting has shifted because for a lot of parents, they're just too exhausted to get into the, or to just, explain. It's just easier to say yes. And I know many times I've made decisions with my girls and I'm not the popular parent, and, and it's standing firm and having the courage to know that at some point they will understand why I said or did, what I did.
And
set the boundaries. Yeah.
Love that.
I love that too. The parent one always gets me, always. For me, the example, like there's a lot, like I had a hard time picking one because it does show up. I went back to early in my career, early 30s, no kids. I worked in an industry that was predominantly males, as it was 20 years ago, all around the table. The boardroom table was men, and then there was me, and I was 30 and young and whatever, a little hot-headed. I was.
We all in our 20s?
A little, yeah. But I had someone who was technically my peer, but he had been there, he's near retirement. So I get his perspective a little more now, but he frankly didn't know what to do with me. Now I look back at it with different lens. He just didn't know what to do with me. But instead he was condescending. He was rude. He would keep me out of meetings. It just got super, super unprofessional. It was never anything other than that, but to the point where I couldn't work with this individual. The condescending nature, like I had never been spoken to that way. And I remember just like, you're young. Like my morals are telling me this is really wrong. So what do I do? So I did what I would normally do. And I went direct to the person which was hard enough to do when he's senior and he's male and I'm junior. So I did that, didn't do anything. Then I go to my boss and my boss is like, well, deal with him. And I'm like, well, I've tried that. My boss did nothing. Another male. Sorry, I'm not, but that's just how it was back then. Then I went to HR. Women. True. And then HR stepped in. So Wendy, similar to your story, where HR had to help navigate this scenario. It just shouldn't have been a scenario. Yeah. But morally, I was so torn on like, do I speak up and stand up for myself? Because he hasn't like harassed me, isn't sexually harassed. Is it, am I overreacting? Is this, but morally it was wrong.
Right.
And nobody should be talked to in that tone in a workplace. Yeah. And so I, in the end, we worked it out. He retired and I didn't.
Well, I think you bring up a great point. I think we often don't speak up because we're afraid of the cost.
100%.
But we're often not considering is the price of silence, of saying nothing, doing nothing. This one I'm really familiar with and struggled again to find a specific example because for as long as I can remember as a young teenager, standing up for what I believed in, and that was of course mixed in with my upbringing and the world that I was in at the time. But I think it was part of who I am, just in my wiring, that if I believed strongly in something, I would stand up for it. I struggled to do that in my personal life, in my closest relationships. But when it came to standing up for issues or for other people, I've found myself many moments standing alone, trying to defend or champion something. And I look back now, like you, and a lot of that was misguided, and I would probably have handled it very, very differently. But I always did the best I could with what I had at the time. But what it helped me with is develop this comfort with standing alone. I'm okay standing alone. And I think if we're not able to do that, if we don't develop that muscle, then we are handicapped in some ways. We're limited because we always are depending on the approval and encouragement of others and them giving us the rubber stamp. And sometimes no one is seeing the way forward but you. And we are the experts at our own lives and often waiting for others to kind of give us the marching orders. It's like, no, nobody else knows you like you, and you got to get comfortable. And I think this is such an important one for leaders. Think of the leaders that we work with, Rob, and how often they compromise the future of their business because they're afraid to stand alone in leadership. And now we encourage collaborative leadership. We encourage high-performing teams. But even in the highest-performing teams and the best cultures, leaders sometimes have to say, guys, I get that you're saying this, but this is what I'm seeing, and we need to go this way, and here's why. The willingness to do that, that's moral courage.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. And I think that the balance there, when you get comfortable and willing to stand alone, when you're willing to be able to do that, you are then able to now receive the guidance and the feedback from your trusted circle. You still, after you get that guidance and feedback, say what you just said. I hear what you're saying. This is the direction I need to go, and this is what I need to do. But you do it where I think is the mistake that some make is they think that's I'm willing to go alone means I'm not willing to listen to anyone else. And that's not what we're saying.
No,
here.
not
it
at
is.
all. Not
it
at
is. I'm so open to hearing from the right sources, the trusted sources, and I'm willing to go alone.
But finding trusted sources that are actually willing to risk with you is quite rare.
Yes.
The vast majority of our closest relationships, be it family, being friends, will seek to protect us and keep us safe. So you start talking about making a bold move. I've often said to people, careful who you share your dream with when it's in that embryonic stage, because if you go to family and friends, they are well-meaning, they love you, they want to keep you safe, they will probably shit all over your dream and get you to pick the safe option. And that's not malicious, but there's fear is showing up for them, and the only way they know how to deal with it is to dial you back. So make sure that in that trusted circle, you've got some people that are willing to say, yeah, man, let's go, right? And give you some input, give you some feedback, but are willing to throw gasoline on that fire and not water.
Yeah,
right?
Wholeheartedly.
I think it's so important.
Other topic.
Whole other topic.
Yeah. on that one. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Your circle really matters, right? Show me your friends. Show me your future. I'll show you your future. You introduced this a moment ago before we got into the different types. You started talking about emotional courage, the willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to ask for help. I think guys really, really struggle on this front. But it is a form of courage that is so, so important. Can you talk about a moment in your life where that really showed up and was really meaningful for you?
Yeah, I wanted to share a different lens because probably the most vulnerable it's ever shown up is with myself.
Right.
And that's in COVID when, the only time that not just me alone, but everyone was forced to stop and pause. And I had the situation where I was actually alone because my kids would go back and forth. So try spending 7 days alone and you can't go anywhere and you can't see anyone. And it you talk about, I understand now more in therapy when they say take time and pause, but that was a mega pause for me. And so I had to truly get vulnerable with myself. And it was an exploration of forgiving myself, loving myself unconditionally, the work you do when you look in the mirror and you're like, I love you and I love my body. And that work is what healed so much of my history, my wounds. And so for me, being vulnerable with myself, and it might sound odd, but I had never been like that with myself. So to have that was such a gift. And I think so often we're our worst critic and we're so hard on ourselves. And what if you just started talking so much kinder to yourself? And that's what that was for me. Yeah.
Well, vulnerability starts at home, right? If you can't get honest with yourself, how can you possibly get truly honest and vulnerable with other people?
Yeah.
It does begin with that. I love that.
Well, it's interesting because if we go back to at the opening of our show, we talked about courage being that showing up authentically. So emotional courage is showing up authentically with our emotions, right? And when you think about that, you then have to first understand and know and be true and vulnerable with what they are. Yeah. I think sometimes people take this and in a misguided way, they think vulnerability is just sharing all my deep, dark secrets with the world, right? And I think for a lot of people, that's actually,
TikTok, here it comes.
Well, that's it. And it actually becomes attention seeking.
Right.
It becomes a very different reason and purpose for why we do that. I think when you do get to that point of being able to, hey, I'm hurting and here's what's going on in me, and now be able to share out of that, not looking for somebody to now meet that emotional need, but to hear what is going on is a very different type of vulnerability.
Yeah. And to maybe not even fix it, right? I know for women sometimes when we share, our emotional vulnerability from a man's perspective.
I'm going to fix it for you.
Right. Yeah. And that's just,
that's what we do.
Right. That's what we do. How can I fix it? How can I fix you? And sometimes it's I don't need to be fixed. I need you to just listen.
Yeah. You need to be heard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
I think, on the emotional piece, it's when I separated from my girl's father because, I made the decision, but I also suffered the repercussions of I broke up the family. I was not the good parent anymore. I wasn't the fun parent. And even when they chose to live with their dad full time, of course, I accepted it because I wanted, they're old enough to make their own decisions. But I've learned, especially over the last 6 months, to speak openly to them about how certain actions, decisions, behaviors that they exhibit hurt me. And that's an uncomfortable conversation for them because now they can't hide behind TikTok on their phones when I'm having a conversation with them. Yeah. But it's become, and with help, through therapy and lots of conversations we've had, I've been able to, even when my voice shakes and I'm crying, but I've been able to share that emotional side on having courage to do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Super
that's courage exemplified right there. When you're able 100%. To get that honest and that real in an effort to deepen the connection and help someone understand this is what's so for me.
Yeah.
For me, that journey started a long time ago, although it would take me most of my adult life to figure it out. As a young leader who was in way over his head and didn't have the tools, it didn't take me long in my late 20s to go something's not good here, something's not right. And so I began reaching out. And I remember many conversations, some that were tremendously helpful, some that backfired in my face and made me almost sorry that I had tried, right? But I knew there had to be a better way. And so a lot of moments of emotional courage showed up there in sharing my struggles and sharing my journey, maybe it was fueled by desperation, but courage is fueled by different things, right? But I think the most significant event for me was in 2011, and I've told the story on the show. Jim, my mentor, had reached out to me months before. Hey, I haven't heard from you in a long time. How are you doing? What he didn't know that is in that moment, my marriage had fallen apart. I was probably at the lowest I've ever been in my life. And I was so ashamed of being where I was. I couldn't even respond. And it took me 4 months to work up the emotional courage to just respond to his email, say, I'm not good. I probably have never been worse. I remember I just had a conversation this week with another leader who was struggling, and I was referring to Jim, and I've made this statement before. Jim saved my life. He got me on a path, and taught me the importance of staying open and working through those issues. I think men really struggle on this front. And if I can say anything to any of the men listening, if you struggle to show up this way, it's like half your gear is not even working. Mm-hmm. You're not living a rich life. You're living a life that's shut down, and like black and white instead of color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Taking those little steps of courage to open up to your partner, to open up to your friend about some of the things that you're afraid about or you're hurting about, can make such a difference in experiencing then someone who hears you and loves you and accepts you. And it may backfire on you when you share it with certain people, and that's okay, because in those moments you're still building courage, you're still working the muscle. It's like there's some days at the gym you feel like you're on top of the world, and there's other days it feels like it's on top of you, but you showed up, right? You showed up, you did the workout, I think it's very, very similar to that. Let's talk about another one. Man, we could talk about this stuff all day long, but social courage. This is about stepping out into the social arena. It's either like getting into a group you're new to, speaking up in a meeting, or the willingness to, again, stand apart from the crowd. And it's somewhat similar to moral courage, but this is really tied to relationships. How has that shown up for you?
Living richly for me. You guys are all such assholes.
All right.
You heard it here, folks. Yeah. You heard it here first.
No, but in all seriousness, living richly was for me like so far out of my comfort zone. Like here we are talking about very personal things. You talk about being vulnerable in a public forum. For me, that's different. It's outside of my comfort zone. It's not. I'm a very private person. Yeah. And so to have this forum, knowing we're helping people is obviously what really drives me. But that was really uncomfortable for me. Like to know that we're, I think what makes it easy is it's the three of you who are anything but assholes, for the record. Like it's such a loving, warm. Steve, on the other hand, no, I'm kidding.
Whoa!
I'm on fire. I have to. It was so easy.
So many things you're learning here first today.
Wow.
I'm kidding. But like to have such a warm, inviting space is what makes it so easy. But for me, that really is not. It's very out of character, if I can put it that way. And it felt very raw. Like for me, it took courage to be able to sit around a table and talk the way we do.
Yeah, 100%.
Remember when we all recorded our personal episodes?
Yes.
Yeah.
How
uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I remember both of you saying just how hard's not the right word, but I guess hard. Yeah, no, I'm just trying to think of another word that ties to
it was my idea. It was my idea.
It was a dumb idea.
And then we recorded the first one, and we recorded a bunch of episodes, and I said, guys, I'm not ready. I'm going to do mine the next time. So it was my idea, and I bowed out.
Bailed. And then when you did it, it's one of the first and only times I've seen Eric where the shaking as you told your story. And I remember that. Yeah, it's very hard to be vulnerable.
Yeah, and I was so exhausted. And even though I had shared my story publicly before, there was something very different about sharing it on the podcast. I don't know why.
Yeah.
So anyways, just to your point, I think I know as I've, when I talked about shifting my career and whatnot, there's been, the odd social comment, over the years around, who does she think she is? Or she got, she got so lucky, and I've said on another episode before, like, fuck luck. It's really about, I've learned to be able to stand in my truth, and I'm not going to make everybody happy, and that's okay. As long as I know that I'm leading with a servant heart, to me, that's more important than judgment.
Yeah.
But, and I say that and it sounds easy, but it's, you had mentioned earlier, it's trained behavior.
For again, this one is one that I'm familiar with for a long time. I remember when I took a stand for my faith as a young teenager, had my own expression of faith that had come out of being raised in it, and I lost my whole friend group. Literally overnight. Years later, when I left the church world, I lost my entire social network. Like you talk about going from having a lot of people around you to the silence was deafening.
Yep.
So I've experienced that many times throughout my life. And again, as I said earlier, it's that meant a lot of loneliness. I've dealt with a lot of loneliness throughout my life. And I used to despise that about my life. And now I've really learned to embrace it. It's like, because it's developed a superpower in me that if I believe in something and it's clear to me that I have to do it, I've built the muscle to say whether you come with me or not, right? Like I'm a collaborative guy. I want people to go with me. I want to take them along, but it's like, no, I'm going. Like, this is something I've got to do. And if it means I have to walk alone, or I have to walk with, I may lose some friends or lose some men. We've seen that in recent years, right? Like, friendships change when you make decisions to move ahead. And I think, again, the power of community, we talk about it all the time. It's important to surround yourself with the right people, but understand that not everyone can follow you along every stage of the journey.
Yeah.
Some are with you for a season, some are with you for a reason, and probably a really small few are with you for a lifetime.
Yeah.
Right.
And even good communities change over time. And I think that's the important. It doesn't mean that we often say we got to find the right community. You may have had the right community for the moment. And now as you grow and move into a different place, there may be a different community that's the right community. And I think that's important. Community is important. The same community we're just not going to travel in the same community our entire life.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Let's shift gears. There's so many other forms of courage. We talk about spiritual courage. We talk about intellectual courage. We would need like a whole part 2. But I want you to imagine you could go back in time, right? You have a time machine. And so, you heard it here first. We have a time machine. So many firsts today. Yeah. We're going to have an episode, just all the highlights of all the firsts and weird shit that showed up on today's show. But we have a time machine. You can go back in time to, let's say, your early 20s. What advice would you give yourself when it comes to being brave and showing up courageously?
Well, for me, I don't even know if I would bring up courage. I would bring up, again, the notion of just be true to you, love yourself, be authentic to yourself, embrace yourself. And if I could teach my younger self to do that, courage will just happen. Right. I don't need to talk about courage with them if I can talk about, because that's been the biggest challenge for me, is learn to have your voice. All of that. Courage will come naturally.
I'm like, it's similar. I think I would instill confidence in myself, and I think the confidence can lead to courage. I was like a crazy, like, not 20s. I'm like such a shy kid, which seems odd now for people who meet me now. They're like, you don't seem shy at all, but I was like painfully shy. I would just go back and want to instill just say to myself, like, you're good, you've got this, you're amazing. All those things I just didn't hear.
Right.
And I think that would have resulted in greater courage when I was younger.
Yeah. I think, reminding myself that, and I tell my daughters this all the time, you can do, be, or have anything you want as long as you're true to you.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if I went back, I would say to my younger self, you're stronger than you think. You're going to go through a lot of trials and tribulations, but don't lose heart. These are preparing you for your life's work, and never lose sight of it. Probably what I was said. What's the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself as you've shown up bravely in different seasons of your life?
I think it's about the confidence that I've gained versus always looking for the outcome. Because sometimes the outcome isn't what we expect it to be or what we think it's going to be. And that can feel different than expected, but what can you take from that? And I know for me, that's the confidence piece that I can apply to every little piece of my life.
I love that. It's not about the outcome. It's about what it produces, the process produces in you, right?
Yeah.
Love it. What about you, Rob?
Well, I think the thing that I'm learning more and more today is I'm a tough motherfucker.
Well, I would have just said the latter part, but
exactly.
We're swearing up a storm.
We are. This is going to be
an adult show. Come on, it's an adult show.
Right, exactly.
Aimed at an adult audience.
No, when I tell my story, and for the longest time, I really didn't give myself credit for when I look at the storms and the things that I have faced head on. We're recording this episode. It's not going to come out on this date, but we're recording this episode on the anniversary of my daughter's death.
Right.
This is a week of reflection for me. It's also the week that my mom, anniversary of my mom's death. But I look at my dad being when people hear the story of what I've gone through with a dad in prison who literally was breaking out of prison and coming after a family, to all of the stuff that I've gone through, and that I'm standing, and not just standing, but that my outlook on life is one that is positive and life-giving. And I moved away from being an optimist to a realist, thanks to Ben Bergeron, but still I am much more an optimistic outlook on life than pessimistic. And most people with even half of the trials or tribulations that I've gone through would be buried in that, in the victim mindset.
Yeah.
And I think it's really only been in the last couple of years I've started to say, no, like, bring it on.
Yeah.
I can face anything because nothing is what is as difficult as what I've already faced in life.
Yeah, I love that. I've said on the show, and I've said to you many times, the trials and tribulations I've been through, one thing I've learned about myself is, like you, I'm one tough son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Right? Every hardship, every challenge just makes me stronger, makes me more focused, makes me more determined. You might remember this phrase. It was common in church days, right? I'd rather wear out than rust out. Well, I'm determined to not do either of those things.
Yeah.
I'm not going to wear out. I'm not going to rust out. I'm going to shine bright and stay strong and live richly every fucking step of the way. I think the more we face life head on, every time we stare down fear and we take the step, all we teach ourselves is, I can do this. And to your point now, it's like the world, there's nothing we can't do. The potential's limitless.
Yeah. Right? And I think it's recognizing that it's hard, but still doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like we can see that it's hard, but that hard doesn't feel as hard as it maybe once did.
Yeah. Hard is not an excuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hard is just a reality.
No, and it's supposed to be hard.
Well,
whoever said it was going to
hard.
said it was supposed to be easy. And I think I was thinking reflection for another show, so I'll save that for another show, but I think comfort is one of the great pandemics of our day. People are so
100%.
comfortable. We want life to be easy, and life isn't. So we have this expectation that somehow that's out of whack.
Right.
And yet you study the life of anyone who's ever done anything significant, and they were
face
just
hard.
like everybody else, except instead of saying, "Oh, poor me," no, they just one step at a time, one day at a time, one decision at a time. They made mistakes and they went forward and backwards, and just like we all do. But the more we lean into showing up courageously, the stronger we show up, the greater the impact we can make, right? It's supposed to be hard. All right, guys, final round for our listeners. Okay, this has been an amazing conversation. One of my favorites in a long time. I love them all, but I really like this one, probably because this is one of my core values. So it really jazzes me up. But if you were to leave final advice to our audience, to our listeners about the subject of daring to be brave.
Living your best life and living courageously go hand in hand.
Yeah.
You can't have one without the other. So continue to embrace what it means to live your best life, and you will discover all the courage that you need.
Love that.
I would say scared is what you're feeling, but brave is what you're doing. And try not to lose sight of what you're actually doing. Are you tingly?
I'm tingly.
No,
I think I'm tingly now.
Yeah, we're all tingly now.
If that mic wasn't fixed to I would drop it right now. Just that was powerful.
I would just embrace the uncertainty. It's gonna be there. It's always gonna be there. Go with the flow.
Yeah.
Just embrace it and see what happens.
100%.
Yeah.
I would go back to the quote I used earlier that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the little voice at the end of the day that just says, I'll try again tomorrow. Folks, thank you so much for listening in. We hope this conversation has been meaningful to you. We encourage you to visit our website, livingrichley.me. That's livingrichley.me. You're going to find out all kinds of great information where we have all the previous episodes, show notes. We have information about the 15-day Life Vision Challenge, along with our private Facebook group where you can join the nation and surround yourself with other people on a similar journey. We are so grateful that you continue to support the show, and the growth is just really humbling for us. We look forward to the next time you join us. Until then, make the rest of your life the best of your life.